And welcome in, Draft Nicks. It's time to go on the clock here at Draft Nation with one of the lead draft analysts, in my opinion, out there. When we talk football and we talk about keeping an eye on the players at the upper echelons of the college level who are going to be going early in NFL drafts, and we talk about those teams' needs and what they may be, one of the best in the business, in my opinion, from CBSSports.com, Ryan Wilson joining us today. Ryan, thanks for taking the time. Thanks for going on the clock with Draft Nation.
Hey, Chris, good to see you, buddy. Thanks for the intro. Hopefully it wasn't disappointing to people that were expecting someone else, better looking, better sourced. But hey, here we are.
No, absolutely not. This fulfills all the expectations because I think you come at this from a great angle of being able to talk, like I said, about what we've seen so far through a little more than half of, or just about a half of a college football regular season. And also, we're nearing the halfway point of the NFL season as well now, with the trade deadline just days away. It's really going to affect, how we judge teams and whether they're in or out. For those of you watching this on YouTube, you're seeing my fingers make the air quotes. For those of you listening, no, that's being decided about certain teams and which way they're moving at the midway point of the season and the deadline approaching. And how that'll shake out not just big boards, but where players go, what teams they end up lining up with at the 2025 NFL Draft in Green Bay. So let's start there, Ryan. Let's start at the deadline, November 5th, the NFL trade deadline. And it's interesting to me that, we've already got, look, we knew the Patriots and the Panthers were not going to be competing this year. I think that was pretty clear to most of us. The Giants, despite having a second win on the board, are another team that I think is becoming more and more clear by the week, not involved, going to be a top five, at least a top 10, if not a top five pick. But then to see a team like Tennessee basically say, yeah, you know what, we're much more interested in dealing than being dealt to. We realize where we're at in this thing with the development of Will Levis being, stunted by injury this year, certainly, but also with everything else going on. So let's start with just the complexion of the deadline and where we could still see maybe some moves happen, because it feels like Hopkins was certainly one of the big dominoes that could then create ripples out through November 5th in that wide receiver market, which seems to be the hottest as well, or the most, hotly talked about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as someone being you who covers Pittsburgh sports and the Steelers, and as someone being me who's a Steelers fan, the worst case scenario happened on Thursday night when the Rams won, because that means you would imagine Cooper Kupp staying put. They now have 3 wins. A year ago, the Rams were 3-6. They ended up 10-7, made the playoffs. And one of my big takeaways from that game where they beat the Vikings in LA is that the way that Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp, and Puka Nacua looked, that's what Aaron Rodgers was hoping he would get when Devontae Adams arrived, because you heard it through that telecast in the Steelers-Jets game. Chris Collinsworth kept saying, okay, now you can't guard Garrett Wilson one-on-one because of Devontae Adams. And then the Jets, as they do, whether Aaron Rodgers is there or not, typically implode. So that's one takeaway. The quarterback situation, or the wide receiver situation, if the Steelers are interested, got a little less deep, if you will, because it feels like Cooper's staying put. But they have other needs. They could sniff around the cornerback position. In terms of wide receivers that could be available, Deontay Johnson's name always comes up, not for Pittsburgh, but for other teams looking for wide receivers. He's currently on the Devontae Adams injury plan until perhaps he ends up somewhere and magically gets healthy. So that's potentially a name to watch. A couple other names that I've heard that I think are incredibly intriguing. Max Crosby to the Lions, and one that was floated the other day, and the person I was talking with said if the cost were even 2 first-round picks, I would seriously consider it. And my first impulse was that's silly, and then my second impulse was maybe not so silly. Myles Garrett to the Lions, because either of those guys are game changers. You're going to get Aiden Hutchinson back hopefully in January once they get to the playoffs. Brian Branch, their second-round pick from a year ago, who plays safety or cornerback or wherever you want him to play. You can play linebacker if you want him to. He's playing out of his mind. And that defense is so much better than it was a year and a half ago. And we know what that offense can do. So I'll say this. I enjoy that they've moved the deadline back. I also enjoy that there's been more movement because growing up, there was no such thing as a trade, and it was so incredibly rare.
Yeah.
And now you see things happening. I got a list somewhere. Oh, yeah, here's a list. So, like the last few years, I mean, Minkin went to the Steelers in 2019.
Yep.
He showed up right away. That San Francisco game had a couple turnovers, I believe. Jalen Ramsey to the Rams that same year. Von Miller went to the Rams in 2021. They go to the Super Bowl. And then, of course, the Christian McCaffrey in 2022 to San Francisco. At the time, I was like, okay, running backs are still sort of overvalued. Christian McCaffrey is clearly the reason that offense clicks.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. When I first heard the rumblings of Crosby and then Garrett, the initial knee-jerk reaction I saw from a lot of insiders around the league, guys who were really well plugged in, like Schefter, for example, was, come on, these teams aren't going to trade the face of their franchise. But when you hear that, you're also hearing it, I think, through the voice of probably the owner of that organization or someone high up in those organizations who shudders at the thought of incurring all of that negative wrath from their fans. But a GM, I think, salivates at these opportunities, knowing that they're going to have, in both places, Vegas and Cleveland, most likely a top 10, if not possibly a top 5 pick. Cleveland right now would be 3rd on the board. Vegas would be 8th. I think they salivate at the opportunity to expedite a rebuild or a retooling. Nobody's excited to trade a Max Crosby or a Myles Garrett. That's not what I'm implying. But the idea of building your franchise, every GM is always trying to build a team. And when you're down to the studs or less than that, in the cases of Cleveland and Vegas, the idea of being able to add so many resources, high-end resources, like you're talking multiple first-round picks in the case of Garrett, for one piece that, again, in Crosby's case, is not getting any younger. Garrett not getting any younger, not staying any healthier for an entire season. I think there are GMs, and in those two places in particular, that make it very clear that they're in the business of putting things back together in their image, in the way they want to do things, if they make deals like that before or on November 5th.
And Cleveland is such a distinct animal in that that organization is such a mess, even by Cleveland standards. You mentioned they have the 3rd overall pick right now. They didn't have a first-round pick last year and the few years prior to that because of the Deshaun Watson trade. Deshaun Watson's out for the season. I talked to folks that think that Deshaun Watson might be coming back because Jimmy has him so hard-headed and stubborn. I joke that Kevin Stefanski must have been a serial killer in his previous life to get the treatment he's getting because he's a good play caller. The dude won Coach of the Year, and he's perhaps under the most trying circumstances of any NFL head coach right now. He's had to give up play calling duties. I would imagine wherever he lands next, he'll be successful. But now he's just having to eat turd burgers all day and not say anything about it. And in terms of the Raiders, they took Brock Bowers, which was the right pick. All the quarterbacks are off the board, and I'm not convinced that Bo Nix necessarily fixes that team. I wasn't a big Bo Nix first-round pick guy coming out. But they now have Tom Brady. He's going to have some say in who the quarterback's going to be. And if you can get extra draft capital, extra players, and lose, obviously, the best player right now, Max Crosby, maybe that's something you consider if you're Tom Telesco, because Tom Telesco, who came over from the Chargers, isn't one to move up and down draft boards. So he typically stays put. And if that's the case, you're going to have to find a quarterback perhaps using a different means. And the more draft capital you have, perhaps that allows you to figure things out as opposed to trying to move up to get whichever player you love the most.
Well, what's interesting to me then is that, and look, it's no surprise that teams that finish near the top of the board, bottom of the standings, usually need quarterbacks, right? That's the most important position in football. And if your quarterback is not playing well, and they're really bad in some cases, you're probably going to finish somewhere in the top 5 to top 10 in draft selection order. That's no surprise. But I think as it currently stacks, to have teams that are all still questioning whether quarterback could be a pick for them or not is what's most interesting. We're used to saying, okay, well, teams 2 through 5 and team number 7, yeah, they all need a quarterback. This year, at least as it stands right now, New England number 1. If we just go by the current draft order, right? New England number 1, they've got their quarterback. They're not going to be picking one. Carolina number 2. Who knows what happens with Bryce Young? That's another name that's even been kicked around at the trade deadline.
Yeah.
Cleveland number 3, you just mentioned. Jimmy Haslam probably wants to prove that the investment in Watson was worth it, even though the rest of the world can see that it hasn't been and it won't be. Tennessee, would it be too early to pull the ripcord on Will Levis?
Well, they pulled the ripcord on Bryce Young.
Exactly.
Same draft class.
Right. So, and then the Jets at 5 right now, they would currently be 5th. Aaron Rodgers has got maybe one more year in him. New Orleans at 6. Carr not getting any younger. You get all the way to Jacksonville at 7, and they've kind of locked themselves into Trevor Lawrence land, for better or worse. And then Vegas at 8, you just mentioned. Giants at 9 will be looking as well. So 8 of the top 9 teams could be in the market for quarterback, Ryan, in what is not a really quarterback-rich year. And I guess that's the next place to go. Handicap the next year's quarterback class right now as we stand, a little more than halfway through the college season.
So I do a podcast at CBS Sports called With the First Pick. It's a draft podcast, but we talk about rookie players, first and second year players in the NFL, and of course the college guys. I do it with Rick Spielman, the former Vikings general manager, who was there 10 plus years. So he adds a lot of behind the scenes institutional knowledge, and obviously he was in the league for more than 30 years, so he knows way more than I do. I'm just sort of you're
the vessel. You're the vessel, Ryan.
Right.
Come on, this is important. You're getting us the information.
I get you the information through Rick. Anyway, it's a lot of fun to do, and I learn a lot from Rick. But I say that because we spent a lot of time talking about comparing this draft class to the Kenny Pickett class from a few years ago, when that class was, in terms of quarterbacks, and no disrespect to anyone in that quarterback class, that was a bad quarterback class. Kenny was the only one in the first round. Then Malik Willis went in the third. Des Ridder went in the third. Des Ritter's gotten cut. He just got re-signed recently. Incredibly, he was incredibly emotional about getting re-signed because football is so serious to him. And I say that because we talked to him at the combine, and that was a guy that you would run through the wall for. But physically, he just never put it together, and that was sort of the hallmark of that draft class. Matt Corral washed out. But you fast forward to this draft class. This draft class is better, but it's nothing close to Caleb, Jaden, Drake May. We haven't seen Michael Penix Jr. play. We've seen a little bit of Bo Nix. Bo Nix hasn't been lights out, and J.J. McCarthy's hurt, the 6 guys that went last year. That said, if you're Carolina, you need a quarterback, and it ain't Andy Dalton, and they seem to be out on Bryce Young. We'll see if Bryce will get a chance to start this weekend. We'll see if anything changes, but it feels like he's not Dave Canales' guy. Dave is a new head coach, and a lot of times we see that turnover there. So right now, my number 1 quarterback is Shedeur out of Colorado, Shedeur Sanders, Coach Prime's son. And then number 2 is Cam Ward out of the U, transferred from Washington State. And, you can talk to people that have it the other way around. A lot of folks in the league, scouts in particular, they weren't convinced that Cam was a first-round pick over the summer. And a lot of the reasons is because he didn't play on time. A lot of the knocks against Caleb. He's an incredible athlete, but the running around behind the line of scrimmage stuff, sort of what you see from Justin Fields at times, that got him in trouble in Chicago and frustrated fans to a certain degree in Pittsburgh. But, dude, he is special. Shedeur is more of a pocket passer who has a little more athleticism. And then third, and this is a name to keep an eye on because I heard about this guy over the summer, watched him over the summer and liked him. He only played 1 game last year, and he's been balling out this year. The dude that replaced Jaden Daniels at LSU, Garrett Nussmeier. He is so much fun. He can spin it. He's a pretty good athlete. His dad is the QB coach for the Eagles. His dad played in the league. And you look at Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers, and you say to yourself, why aren't you guys better? You look at Garrett Nussmeier and you say, this guy keeps getting better, and he's only played a handful of games.
So here's my question about Nussmeier, and this is a little bit in the weeds because I have people in Louisiana. I have family in Louisiana, a lot of whom, unrelated to this conversation, at least right now, because he won't be draft eligible for a while, absolutely love Eli Holstein at Pitt. But here nor there, big win for them on Thursday night that didn't really involve the quarterback at all. But anyway, that have questions about Nussmeier away from the facility and away from the game, I guess, headspace and leadership questions. I don't want to just throw stuff out there willy-nilly, but I think that's something to keep an eye on. But you're right, that the on-field skills have continued to improve exponentially, it feels like, week by week, and we'll see how it plays out for them throughout the rest of the season. Clearly, as one of just 2 teams left in the SEC who don't have a conference loss, they're playing Texas A&M, the other team, this weekend. We'll see how that shakes out. But Nussmeier is definitely one that's shown the skills progression on the field as opposed to those other SEC quarterbacks that you mentioned. Ewers looked like a baby deer trying to cross a highway during rush hour Saturday night. I mean, just a disaster. Milroe has shown certainly the ability to score touchdowns either with his legs or his arm, but I think there are some inconsistencies there. And the other one that was talked about a bunch coming into the season, Carson Beck, has left me just wondering: is this just a Stetson Bennett clone, basically?
He hasn't been as good as Stetson in college, is the thing. And over the summer when we talked about him, my comp for him was Jared Goff, because when Jared came out, there were some questions about how good he could be, and it took him a long time to figure out who he was. He didn't hit his stride even in Sean McVay's offense. And I wonder, is he Jared Goff pre-Detroit? And, you can get by with that if everything else is perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the other thing I've decided to put on a T-shirt and just repeat until, I don't forget it. Fit matters so much. We stick these guys in crappy situations and we're surprised when they fail. And it's easy to make fun of Bryce Young. But you wonder, like, if CJ Stroud had been in Carolina, are they that much better? You just don't know. And the other thing is that it's incredibly difficult to figure out how these guys are going to work. You just don't know. We talked to all these guys during the pre-draft process at work and on the podcast, and they're all great kids. And this, like, it feels like kids of, I call them kids, but these college players have been they're so much more mature now than they were 15, 20 years ago. And they have a lot more responsibility on their shoulders. But I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I like Shedeur a lot. I like Cam a lot. There are a lot of questions. I was on the Caleb Williams train from day one. And, you get through the process. As you get down the stretch, you're looking to poke holes in these kids. And I had a scout tell me one time about Quinnen Williams. He said, sometimes there doesn't have to be anything wrong with the player.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think that was the case with Caleb. We're learning that with Jaden, and we'll see what this looks like. I know you're a gambling guy right now. The Ryan Wilson over-under for quarterbacks is 3.5 going in the first round, and I actually like the under right now. We'll see.
I was going to say, yeah, but, 3.5 definitely feels like a definite under there, because that's what I was going to ask you next. Is this is what happens throughout the process. We watch quarterbacks play throughout the year, and like you said, poke holes in what they're able to do or not do. You made the comparison to the Pickett class of 2022, which, only one quarterback ended up going in the first round. It was Pickett and Pickett alone. Do you think that will serve as a cautionary tale to talent evaluators who walk into this year's draft and say, hey, I like Shedeur, or I like Cam Ward, or whoever it may be that they like, but I understand this is a borderline first-round guy at best. Like, are there any surefire first-round quarterbacks in this class other than maybe Shedeur Sanders?
I would say there's not, if we're being honest with ourselves. And I think you make a good point. I think the league showed themselves in the Kenny Pickett class that we're not going to overdraft these guys, because in the media, we talked ourselves into Malik going in the first round.
Yeah.
I'd seen some folks talk about Desmond Ridder. I didn't think that was going to happen because he just, the lack of consistency in terms of throwing the football. I wasn't a Kenny Pickett first round guy. I thought he might go borderline first, second. And Matt Corral was the same thing, even though Matt Corral, and I have to own it, was my QB1 that year. But hey, it didn't work out. And I think knowing that, and as I mentioned, folks had questions about Cam coming into the season, Cam Ward. There's a lot of talk around the league about Carson Beck, but he was a facilitator of that offense last year. He's been asked to do a little bit more this year. And like I told Rick the other day, it feels like sometimes he's playing through a straw. Like, he doesn't see things that you need to see as a quarterback, no matter the level. And, you can take a flyer on him if you want. And look, some of the bottom of the first round guys, they've been home runs. Lamar Jackson, Teddy Bridgewater was a good player before I got hurt. But then you have the Paxton Lynches of the world who didn't exactly work out either. And that was an overdraft by the Broncos at the time because they thought they had their guy. John Elway did. But I think the movement is going to be away from sort of gambling on these guys, because even last year's draft class, the first 3 picks made sense. JJ McCarthy got pushed up, and I didn't love JJ, the player, coming out because he wasn't asked to do a lot. When you dug a little deeper and you saw how he played on third downs, it was a little bit more impressive, but he was still a work in progress. Michael Penix Jr., I thought, was a first-round pick all day long. The media pushed him down for some reason. And then the Bo Nix thing I didn't get, but as Rick Spielman calls it, he says that was Sean Payton's vanity pick. And, we'll see if it works. So far it hasn't. But I think the overarching message is, if you have needs elsewhere and you can fill those needs, draft that player. Something else I'll mention. I said this last December when I was incredibly frustrated as a Steelers fan that they had just moved on from Matt Canada. Right. They continued to play Kenny Pickett until Mason Rudolph became Big Ben 2.0, which is sort of a fun little 3-week span. And I tweeted out that, the Steelers back in whatever year that was traded up for Devin Bush. They went from 20 to 10 to get him, a linebacker. It didn't work out, but my point is that if you have a need and you love a player, go get him. And at the time I said, if you like Michael Penix Jr. the Steelers, go get him. Now the counter argument, and it makes sense, is they need offensive line help. But Troy Fautanu, who I loved, has been injured. He's not going to play this year, it looks like. Their offensive line is pretty much piecemeal. Even when Zach Frazier was hurt the last few weeks, they had whoever came in for McCollum, thank you. Yeah, the McCormick played the right guard. He held his own. So knowing that you don't even have the offensive line help, would you go back and take a quarterback that you could build around long-term, like a Michael Penix Jr., whoever? And these are the conversations that I think about. I'm sure not a lot of people do. But my point is that if you love a player, don't necessarily let 5 or 6 or 7 draft spots keep you from taking that player if it makes you better, as opposed to settling on QB2 or offensive tackle 4 when you can upgrade that position.
And I think it'll be interesting to see, again, as we push through the season and into draft evaluation, pro day, combine season, and towards the draft in the spring, how these quarterbacks, because I think a lot of it, you mentioned the media kind of pushing guys up and down the board. I think it happens naturally because we all want to sit here and talk about quarterbacks, as you and I just did for 10 minutes. Yeah. And so those are the names that do get pushed up and down the board or get the most spin around them. And so naturally they either get pushed up or pushed down. And maybe we don't talk as much about, nobody's going to sit around and talk about Will Campbell's bench press when they're talking offensive tackles come springtime, the kid from LSU. Nobody's going to, short of Mason Graham from Michigan going on some kind of tear down the stretch where he has multiple sacks in multiple games, nobody's going to talk about his ability to hold up 2 gaps at once, shed a block, and then stuff the run. It's just not the sexy stuff. We get caught up in talking about the skill position players, which in this case, I will say, there are a few others, obviously. Teteroa McMillan from Arizona looks like an absolute beast. Yeah, I mean, that they can do anything they want. I heard somebody say the other day, a 35-yard pass to McMillan is like turning around and handing it off to most running backs. Like, it's just, he goes and gets it. It's impossible for him not to catch the ball. Luther Burden has been underwhelming, I think, this year from Missouri, but still probably going to be a first-round talent just based on skill set. The most interesting one to me is, you mentioned the running back position earlier when we were talking about the devaluation of running backs. Ashton Jeanty could steal the Heisman this year. I know it's crazy to think about a running back from a Mountain West team being in the running for a Heisman, but when you talk about the underwhelming work of most of these quarterbacks, as we just did, and then you roll in the fact that Jeanty is having the year he's having, I think it's real hard for him not to be looked at as a possible first-round pick. The one question I would have are the size concerns. I mean, this guy's 5'9" on a good day. He's quite clearly the most explosive back in college football, Ryan, but there are those, I've got that push-pull within my own evaluation of him of whether this guy is worth a first-round pick at the NFL level on a running back, the devaluation of the position, versus a guy who's clearly the most skilled offensive player, or one of the most, 2 or 3 most skilled offensive players in college football right now.
Yeah, I don't often say that running backs are first-round picks. He's a first-round pick. He's in the same conversation as Bijan and Jahmyr Gibbs. And he's probably same size as Jahmyr. Bijan's pretty big, but I think Bijan came in under 6 feet as well. He looks bigger than that. Roschon Johnson, who played with him at Texas, now at the Bears, actually measured a little bigger and heavier. But my point is that Ashton Jeanty, even when I watched Jahmyr Gibbs and saw Jahmyr Gibbs work out in person at the Alabama Pro Day, it sort of takes your breath away to see how humans move like that when, body parts would actually come off if I tried to do the things that he did. Ashton Jeanty takes that to another level, and it is nuts watching that kid play. Even Rick drafted Adrian Peterson. That was his first draft pick in Minnesota. Even he struggled to find words to explain the things that Ashton Jeanty was doing. He'll help out in pass protection on third down, so he can do that. He can catch the football. He's not asked to do it a lot, but they line him up out wide, and they're throwing him back shoulder fades, and he's having opportunities to make those plays. I think he's a first-round pick all day long. I would take him top 15. Wow. And if you use him properly, Arthur Smith caught a lot of crap for not using Bijan properly in Atlanta, but he's sort of hitting a stride now in the way that Ben Johnson, the Lions are using Jahmyr Gibbs, there's absolutely no reason not to take a Genty because of the versatility he offers. He can help you in the pass game. I mean, Travis Hunter is the most versatile player on planet Earth probably, but I think Ashton Genty is a distant second, but he gives you a lot of things that you can't find in just one player if you're looking for someone else in this draft. I don't sort of like Christian McCaffrey and Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan. I don't consider him necessarily a running back. I consider him like an airback is what my colleague Pete Prisco likes to call these guys. But I think that the versatility he offers is what makes him so intriguing. And it has been fun to watch because a lot of times when I get through, I'll watch these guys, especially as we get closer to the All-Star games, the Shrine Bowl, and the Senior Bowl. I'll watch these guys by groups. And you start going through the running backs, and they all look, after a while, start to look the same. And this is like you're looking at a different movie. And that is a lot of fun to watch because guys can't get there. Like he would dominate flag football. I feel like he'd have the same or similar numbers in flag football because people just can't even touch him. And I've never seen anyone move like that. And that includes Bijan and Jahmyr Gibbs.
Yeah, some wild elusiveness. It's going to be something to watch if he can continue to do what he's doing down the stretch. Just a couple more minutes here with Ryan Wilson of CBSSports.com, one of their top draft analysts, talking about what we've seen in the college season so far, as well as the NFL season. I want to go back around to just big boards in general. Right now, the top player on everyone's board is Travis Hunter, the two-way guy from Colorado. How do you see him developing at the NFL level? Can he really play both ways? Would it make sense for him to play both ways at the NFL level? Or is he better at one side of the ball or the other? And will a team look at him and say, listen, we appreciate what you can do with the football in your hands, but we need your coverage skills, New England. Or, we appreciate your coverage skills, but we need you to touch the ball more often. I mean, how will that work itself out, you think? And do you think he'll end up going first overall to New England? I know we're only at 9 months out from the draft, but let's go ahead and make a wild prediction.
Yeah, I think we're 182 days out. We have this counter that we use on the podcast. I think 182 days until the draft. If I'm the Patriots, they need help at left tackle, offensive tackle in general. You talked about Will Campbell. He would make some sense there. But Travis Hunter is so incredibly special. He's sleight of frame. I was talking to Scout before the season about him, and he said, I like him more at cornerback because number one, you can't play 100 snaps a game. He plays 120 snaps a game in Colorado. That's just not sustainable. Even 80 snaps in the NFL level, you're just asking for injuries. And he struggled with injuries at the time. Last year, Colorado State, this year, the Kansas State game. And both came on offense where you're getting hit as opposed to trying to hit somebody. So maybe you anecdotally minimize the chance for injury when you're the one trying to hit someone as opposed to getting tackled. But that said, and Rick talks about this all the time, you can draft him to be a cornerback in New England, but you have 15 to 20 plays where he's on offense dominating because you can't not have him do that. The issue is just, to borrow an NBA term, load management, because you're going to wear him down and then he's going to be injured. It's not going to help anyone. But if I were the Patriots, I think long and hard about it. And the only reason I would hesitate is if I thought that the offensive tackle that I was going to draft would be an immediate upgrade. It would be an upgrade of what they have, but to the point that he could go in there and pay dividends right away as opposed to being a project. But I don't think I've ever seen anyone like Travis Hunter who thinks he's done at that high level. Champ Bailey was great.
Yeah.
But it's not even close to what Travis is doing.
If there are any Sixers fans in the audience, they just shuddered at the sound of load management after everything they deal with Joel Embiid on a daily basis. One last thing before I let you run, Ryan. I saw a mock draft the other day, and we'll bring it back to our Steelers fandom here to round things out. I saw a mock draft that had the Pittsburgh Steelers taking Jalen Milroe in the first round. You shake your head. Milroe, I don't think ends up being a first-round talent. I do think it opens up the envelope, though, towards questioning what the future is for the quarterback position of the Pittsburgh Steelers and whether they are shopping for one this offseason or not, or keeping Russ around for another year. I know we've got one game of a body of work of him so far this season. Whether they keep Fields around and there are a million different directions they could go. So I'm just curious how you think this may play out.
And I give him credit because for the longest time, you know this, they were so incredibly stubborn about changing their path. I could not figure out, and I say it all the time, when fans know what you're doing is idiotic and you continue to do it, whether it's the Steelers or whatever other teams you follow, it just infuriates people. And the Matt Canada thing drove me crazy to no end. less so Kenny Pickett. You're trying to see what you have, but I give him credit for moving off of it in a hurry.
Yeah.
And the Russ Justin stuff has been sort of fun to watch, just because, Steelers fans have been historically spoiled with their quarterbacks. So that said, they're both on 1-year deals right now. I think Arthur Smith deserves a ton of credit for what he's been able to do. And you can see the difference. You don't have to be an X and O's genius to see the difference between what this offense looks like, even though it's not super explosive, but there's a rhyme to the reason of what's happening as opposed to running a junior high school offense. But I'll quit bellyaching about that. In terms of Jalen Milroe, I think Jalen Milroe's better now than Anthony Richardson was coming out. And AR was a top 5 pick, but he has struggled. And he has struggled with a lot of the same things we saw in college. He didn't play a lot in college. The athleticism and the arm strength and all that stuff is out of this world, off the charts. Jalen's played a lot more football, and he has gotten better under Kalen DeBoer. Wisconsin was a good game for him. Obviously, the Georgia game, and then he's sort of backslid a bit in recent weeks. The Vanderbilt game, they didn't lose because of him, but last week's game, I had some questions. So I need to see more consistency. And when you draft Jalen Milroe, it is going to have to be a project of patience, because he is not going to be. You're probably going to see similar to Anthony Richardson type stuff. Mm-hmm. And can you build around that? I don't know. We don't know yet. Shane Steichen's a good offensive coordinator, good play caller, and he's struggling to get the most out of Anthony Richardson. And we saw what happened when Joe Flacco came in. When Joe Flacco came into that Steelers game, I was like, okay, I know how this is going to work out because I've seen this movie a million times.
Yeah.
So what should the Steelers do if they're picking 15 to 25 or whatever? I don't know if I would take a quarterback there. The only quarterback I would consider is Garrett Nussmeier. And that sounds crazy. I would imagine that Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders will be off the board then. If not, I would give them some consideration. But I would like a quarterback that's more NFL ready than one that's going to be a project, even if the athleticism stuff is off the charts. You have that in Justin Fields, and you can win with that. But there's a reason Justin Fields was replaced by Russ. So they're going to need to replace Cam Hayward at some point. So I don't know if a Mason Graham's going to be hanging around there, but they're going to be some defensive linemen. Deion Walker out of Kentucky is a guy who's having a good season. Edge rush could be a consideration. Cornerback could be a consideration. But Will Howard slipped to 15. Will Johnson. I always call him Will Howard. I don't know. Yeah, Will Johnson. Same common last name, completely different player. The cornerback out of Michigan. If he were there at 15, you sprint to the podium and take him. Patrick Surtain is his comp. So there's going to be a lot of avenues to go down. And, of course, it's going to start with the quarterback situation because they're not going to have one under contract at the end of the year. But this Steelers team has been fun to watch, and it's been different, and it's sort of interesting how they're figuring out how to get things right, especially when historically Tomlin has felt like he just sticks to his gun, going to run the ball 40 times a game and have Kenny Pickett throw a bunch of ball in the flats for 4 yards. So this is different. It's fun. But they have a lot to figure out in terms of that the draft pick when it gets around here. And
a lot of time to figure it out, too. We still, like I said, about 6 months to the draft, but we're halfway through the NFL season, halfway through the college season, almost halfway through the NFL season with the deadline approaching, and felt like it was the perfect time to check in. So, Ryan, thanks for going on the clock with us here at Draft Nation. We appreciate it. Can't wait to check in with you again as things progress toward the NFL draft next spring in Green Bay.
Thank you, Chris.
Absolutely.